Good morning, boys. So we were originally scheduled to have a Zoom session today, but unfortunately we can't do that right now because of the Zoom bombing incidents. So as a result, I'm going to have to record today's class and post it for you. Okay. This is going to be a long recording because there's a lot to cover. We would have had a conversation and gone back and forth and discussed the big assignment that's coming up via Zoom, but that's obviously not going to happen. So again, I've recorded this video, so please press pause if you and go back if you're confused about anything, and if you are continue to be confused about anything, please email me. Okay. So let's get started. Okay, I'm going to cover chapters 16, 17, and 18 with you. Okay, the final three chapters of Brave New World. Okay, 16 and 17 are comprised of a conversation between John and Mustafa Mond. Right, Mustafa Mond is one of the 10 world controllers, and they debate many things. Right, in chapter 16 they debate art and science. Okay, in chapter 17 they debate religion, right, and they debate their uses in this modern world. Okay, so we'll quickly turn through 16. We'll read a few passages and look through them, and the conversation starts between John and Mustafa Mond concerning Othello, that tragedy that we read in the first semester, right, and how it's forbidden. Mustafa Mond gives a few reasons as to why it is prohibited in this Brave New World. One of which is because it's old, right? In a land of progress, that which is old has no function, right? Has no use. But it's also beautiful, and because it's beautiful and attractive, it's exactly something that they don't want in this Brave New World. Beauty has no role in this Brave New World, only function. And lastly, mainly, or another reason, is because nobody would understand it, right? Much like Helmholtz did not understand Romeo and Juliet, most of the citizens of this Brave New World would not understand Othello, okay? As Mustafa Mond later says, the world is stable now. Here it's highlighted in yellow. People are happy, they get what they want, and they never want what they can't get, okay? In other words, they've paid a price. A choice between happiness and high art, right? And when our people are stable and happy, they do not look for high art. In fact, what is the point of tragedy when nobody can experience it or has ever felt it, right? So when the world is stable and happy, what room is there for tragedy? Okay. The next section, after they discuss Othello, covers some of the failed experiments of the past. For example, John asks Mustafa Mond, why didn't you make everyone an alpha double plus, right? And obviously Mustafa Mond laughed. He said, we tried that. It was called the Cyprus experiment, right? And the problem with making everyone alpha double plus is that you just made everyone unstable and miserable. Can you imagine factories being run by alpha double pluses with people with IQs of 150 plus? Doing repetitive jobs. So as a result, nothing got done, factories shut down, nobody made food, and there was this instability and everybody was miserable. Okay. Another experiment that they had is John asked, why do you make them work? Right? Clearly, everything is so efficient that a 7 to 8 hour workday is not not needed anymore. And he says, well, it's not. We don't have them working for 7-8 hours for production. Because of production, but we rather have them working 7 to 8 hours for their own benefit. Apparently, they had an experiment in which they reduced everybody's hours of working it to 3 to 4 hours a day, and again, everybody started to become miserable. Unrest and large increase in consumption of soma. That was the only result, according to Mustafa Mond. Okay, which seems to imply that your average human being, according to him, or at least the average citizen in Brave New World, just needs something to pass the time. Mild, unexhausting labor, as he puts it, seems to be all that's required to keep people stable and happy. That and a soma ration every now and then, okay, and some sports. Okay, so those were the two experiments. We're making everyone an alpha double plus and reducing their work hours, both of which led to instability. Okay, in the second half of chapter 16, Mustafa Mond and John move on from art and those experiments to science. Okay? As he says here on the right-hand page, he says, it isn't only art that's incompatible with happiness, it's also science. Science is dangerous. We have to keep it most carefully chained and muzzled. What? Said Helmholtz in astonishment. But we're always saying that science is everything. It's a hypnoplateic platitude. 3 times a week between 13 and 17, put in Bernard. And all the science propaganda we do at the college. Yes, but what sort of science? Said Mustafa Mond sarcastically. You've had no scientific training, so you can't judge. I was a pretty good physicist in my time. Too good. Good enough to realize that all our science is just a cookery book, with an orthodox theory of cooking that nobody is allowed to question, and a list of recipes that mustn't be added to except by special permission from the head cook. I am the head cook now, but I was an inquisitive young scullion once. I started doing a bit of cooking on my own, unorthodox cooking, illicit cooking, a bit of real science, in fact. He was silent. He was silent. Okay, so even science now seems to be incompatible, right? You should remember back in chapter 15, okay, where Mustafa Mond, despite thinking that this a scientific paper was brilliant and actually might have been true, he censored it and threw it away. Okay, real science has no place in a world that's looking for stability. Okay. Now, at this point, Mustafa Mond changes the subject. Okay, he starts talking about where they're going to exile Helmholtz and Bernard. Bernard, on here upon exile again in Iceland, starts to freak out. Right, they have to sedate him. They soma vaporize him. Soma vaporize him, and but it's that Bernard freakout which reveals something important about Mustafa Mond, something important about him and his motivations. Okay, so on the bottom of the left-hand side in yellow, we see an important quote here. One would think he was going to have his throat cut, speaking of Bernard, said the controller as the door closed, whereas if he had the smallest sense, he'd understand that this punishment is really a reward. He's being sent to an island. That's to say, he's being sent to a place where he'll meet the most interesting set of men and women to be found anywhere in the world. All the people who, for one reason or another, have got too self-consciously individual to fit into community life. All the people who aren't satisfied with orthodoxy. You've got independent ideas who have got independent ideas of their own. Everyone, in a word, who's anyone. I almost envy you, Mr. Watson. And of course, Helmholtz laughs and says, then why aren't you on the island yourself? And this is an interesting question, right? If Mustafa Mond is a great scientist, and if he loves science, and if he's an independent thinker, why has he chosen to continue to be a war controller, be alone, okay, and control the brave new world? His answer is this: because finally I preferred this, the controller answered. I was given the choice to be sent to an island where I could have got on with my pure science, or to be taken on to the controller's council with the prospect of succeeding in due course to an actual controllership. I chose this and let the science go. After a little silence, sometimes, he added, I rather regret the science. Happiness is a hard master, particularly other people's happiness. A much harder master, if one isn't conditioned to accept unquestionably, than truth. He sighed, fell silent again, and continued in a brisker note. Well, duty's duty. One can't consult one's own preference. Now, what's interesting about this is this. Has Mustafa Mond chosen a life that he's rejected everybody else? What I mean by that is this. Everybody in the Brave New World is happy. Happy not by a choice of their own, right? They've been conditioned this way and they've been designed this way. And they've been denied, funny enough, unhappiness. The chance to be noble, the chance to do one's duty, the chance to be virtuous. What's funny is that Mustafa Mond himself is now doing what seems to be a somewhat noble thing, a self-sacrificing thing. He's sacrificing himself for the happiness of other people. He gave up the one thing that makes him most happy, science, for the sake of world stability. Okay? So, paradoxically, ironically, The very thing that Mustafa Mond is getting from this is what he's denying to everybody else. Okay? So then he proceeds to ask Helmholtz where he would like to go. Okay, bottom of the page here at left. He says, by the way, Mr. Watson, would you like a tropical climate? The Marquises, for example, or Samoa, or something more, rather more bracing. Helmholtz rose from his pneumatic chair. I should like a thoroughly bad climate, he answered. I believe one would write better if the climate were bad, if there were a lot of wind and storms, for example. The controller nodded his approbation. I like your spirit, Mr. Watson. I like it very much indeed. As much as I officially disapprove of it, he smiled. What about the Falkland Islands? Okay, so Mr. Watson seems to have embraced this new exile, and has chosen the worst place, one of the worst places in the world, the Falkland Islands, just off the coast of Argentina. Okay, he has chosen unhappiness. Okay. So we then continue the conversation into chapter 17. Okay. Chapter 17, gentlemen, the main topic is not art or science, but now religion. Okay. Now, of course, there is no room for religion in this brave new world. All right. Even though Mustafa Mond surprisingly says that he probably believes that a God does exist. All right, but for the sake of happiness and stability, there is no room for God in this brave new world. Okay, as he calls it later on, let me just bring it up. He calls it Christianity without the tears. Right, as he puts it up on the top left-hand corner, anybody can be virtuous now. You can carry at least half your mortality about in a bottle. Christianity without tears. That's what Soma is. In other words, you can be a good citizen. Right? Without the pain, only with the happiness, right? Without the virtue, okay? Without the virtue, without the self-sacrifice, okay? The chapter 17 then concludes with the big disagreement, or the big schism between John and Mustafa Mond. Starts off in the bottom right-hand corner in yellow here. John says, but I like the inconveniences. We don't, said the controller. We prefer to do things comfortably. But I don't want comfort. I want God, I want poetry, I want real danger, I want freedom, I want goodness, I want sin. In fact, said Mustafa Mond, you're claiming the right to be unhappy. All right, then, said the savage defiantly. I'm claiming the right to be unhappy. Not to mention the right to grow old and ugly and impotent, the right to have syphilis and cancer, the right to have too little to eat, the right to be lousy, the right to live in constant apprehension of what may happen tomorrow, the right to catch typhoid, the right to be tortured by unspeakable pains of every kind. There was a long silence. I claim them all, said the savage at last. Mustafa Mond shrugged his shoulders. You're welcome, he said. Okay. And this just reaffirms the thesis that we have repeated time and time again, right? That there does seem to be a necessity for unhappiness in order for one to live a fulfilling life, okay? And John has accepted it with a full heart, with open arms, okay? And with that, John, to turn to chapter 18 now, moves on to exile himself. He finds himself not quite exile. He doesn't find himself on an island, but he has to stay in civilization to be watched by Mustafa Mond. But John exiles himself by moving into an abandoned lighthouse. Okay. Now, John really does choose the path of pain, right, of unhappiness. And by the way, boys, this chapter for me ruins much of the book. I think it goes too far, and it ruins my impression of John, and I think it just goes way too far. Because what do we start to see that John does at the lighthouse on a regular basis? He starts self-flagellating, right? He starts whipping himself whipping himself for his sins, right? And there are two things that seem to motivate this penance. Number one is his former lust for Lenina, right, and her attempts to seduce him, and then also his mother's death, right, having let Linda kill herself by means of Soma, right. So those two things seem to have really hurt him, and as a result are causing a lot of pain and leading him to whip himself. Okay. Now, as you can imagine, because he's not an island, eventually a group of deltas actually see John doing this to himself. Right. At one point, John even throws himself into a bush full of thorns as well as a part of this penance. But these deltas are astonished to see this man. And eventually, in fact, John becomes something of a tourist site. Right? Crowds start to form around him, disturbing his solitude, disturbing his penance, to the point where he's completely suffocated by these maggots, as he calls them, or to bring up the Nietzsche passage, these last men gawking at him at this strange sight. Okay, and so we'll get to the last section here. Okay, eventually there's such a big crowd. Not only is it a big crowd, but also Lenina shows up. Okay, so I'm going to read this passage to you, and we're going to see what happens as a result of these external pressures. Okay, the young woman stood smiling at him, uncertain, imploring, almost abject smile. The seconds passed. Her lips moved. She was saying something, but the sound of her voice was covered with the loud, reiterated refrain of the sightseers, the tourists. Right now, this young woman is Lenina, right? And the sightseers are repeating, "We want the whip. We want the whip." The young woman pressed both hands to her left side, and on that peachy, bright, beautiful face of hers appeared a strangely incongruous expression of yearning distress. Her blue eyes seemed to grow larger, brighter, and suddenly 2 tears rolled down her cheeks. Inaudibly she spoke again. Then, with a quick, impassioned gesture, stretched out her arms towards the savage, stepping forward. "We want the whip. We want," the crowd keep on chanting. But all of a sudden, they had what they wanted. "Strumpet!" The savage had rushed at her like a madman. "Fitzhugh!" Like a madman, he was slashing at her with his whip of small cords. Terrified, she had turned to flee and tripped and fallen into the heather. "Henry! Henry!" she shouted, but her ruddy-faced companion had bolted out of harm's way behind the helicopter. With a whoop of delighted excitement, and the line broke. With a whoop of delighted excitement, the line broke. There was a convergent stampede towards that magnetic center of attraction. Pain was a fascinating horror. Fry, frenzied, the savage lashed again. Hungrily they gathered around, pushing and scrambling like swine about the trough. Oh, the flesh, the savage ground his teeth. This time it was on his shoulders that the whip descended. Kill it, kill it. Drawn by the fascination of the horror of pain, and from within, impelled by the habit of cooperation, that desire for unanimity and atonement which their conditioning had so ineradicably implanted to them, they began to mime the frenzy of his gestures, striking at one another as the savage struck at his own rebellious flesh, or at that plump incarnation of turpitude writhing in the heather at his feet. So I guess that's a complex way of saying is that because of of these tourists' conditioning, they start to engage in similar activity that John is undergoing. Okay, kill it, kill it, kill it. The savage went on shouting. Then suddenly somebody started singing "Orgy Porgy." Okay, and in a moment they had all caught up the refrain, and singing had begun to dance. Orgy Porgy, round and round and round, beating one another in 6/8 time. Orgy Porgy. So it looks like they start to engage in that ritual that we read about all the way early on that Bernard felt very alone with. Okay, the savage's ritualistic beating had turned to an orgy porgy. Okay, it was after midnight when the last of the helicopters took its flight. Stupefied by soma and exhausted by a long-drawn frenzy of sensuality, the savage lay sleeping in the heather. That's where Lenina was, by the way. So I guess we can assume that John had participated in the orgy porgy. He had given in. Okay? The sun was already high when he woke. He lay for a moment, blinking in an owlish incomprehension at the light, then suddenly remembered everything. Oh, my God, my God. He covered his eyes with his hand. And by the end, we notice that, in fact, John has killed himself. He's hanging at the center of the uh, of the of the lighthouse. Okay. Now, obviously, right, what we can take away from this is that obviously there's no room for someone like John in this world, right, in this brave new world. Now, as crazy and as extreme as he is noble and he is courageous, right? He has a soul, he has a spirit, unlike everybody else. But in this world, there is no room for a man like him. Okay? In other words, the last men, to bring up Nietzsche's word, have destroyed the last real man. Okay? So that's how it ends, gentlemen. Okay? That's how it ends. There's a picture of Aldous Huxley for you. Okay? So take that, absorb it. A lot of you may use this for your comp. Okay? So let's think about our comp now. Okay? I'm going to turn now to the comp list. You'll find the senior comp and everything that you need here in Schoology. All right? And the PDF here at the top. Okay, hopefully it'll let me open it. Okay. I've got all the information that you need. Now, I'm going to go over this now. If you have any questions about it, please email me and I'll promptly respond, okay? So this is your senior comp, which is essentially a research paper, okay? And it's designed to test your ability to read at a college level and to write a college level essay, okay? Between now and the last day of classes, okay, you guys are going to read a book, right, from the list below. In addition, you're going to be responsible for reading at least 2 scholarly articles on the literature, okay? Once you've read your book and completed your research, you're then responsible for writing a 10 to 15 page literary analysis paper focusing on the book you have chosen, okay? Obviously, your paper must be in MLA format, thesis driven, include analysis and quotes from both your articles, and at some point in your essay, I expect you to compare and contrast your book with another that was taught this year in the class, right? Anything from Othello to Machiavelli to the Lincoln speeches to Brave New World, right? Obviously, you also have to include a works cited page, okay? If your essays are all late, it will not be accepted, and you will receive a failing grade, no excuses, okay? So this is instead of your exam, okay? And this is precisely what you're going to end up doing, okay? So here's the book list, right? George Orwell, 1984, which I think pairs quite well with Brave New World. You got the David story, Samuel 1 and 2, which I think pairs well as a contrast with Machiavelli. You could also bring up Othello with regard to this. Yeah, that's probably what I'd pair it with. Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro is a great modern novel. Okay, a little bit easier to read, and also pairs well with Brave New World. Okay, Booker T. Washington, which is a biography about a former slave who ends up founding a school, the Tuskegee Institute, and it's his biography Up from Slavery, which I think pairs well with the Lincoln section. Okay, we then have Richard III by Shakespeare, okay, which I think is very easily paired with Machiavelli and is in fact a critique of Machiavelli's Prince. Okay, Anthony Burgess, A Clockwork Orange, again, very compelling book. It has its own challenges in terms of language, but I think it could easily be paired with Brave New World. And then lastly, we have Xenophon, the Education of Cyrus, which I believe can be paired with many, many, many of the books. It's one of the harder reads and one of the longer reads, but I think it's the book which has the most to teach any of you. So I think it's really worth it. Okay, it's called The Education of Cyrus. You can pair it with Machiavelli. You can pair it with the Lincoln speeches. You can pair it with Brave New World. All of them. Okay, so gentlemen, this is the comp timeline. Okay, today, Wednesday, April 8th, is the intro that you're experiencing right now. By tomorrow, you need to have picked a book. Okay, one of these books, and you're going to submit it via Schoology by tomorrow morning. Okay, so do your research in the rest of the class now and really come to a choice. Okay, For a number of these books, I have PDFs. So if you're interested in getting a PDF from me, just email me and I'll gladly share it with you. Okay? So you're going to be picking the book on Thursday, which gives you about just over 2 weeks to read that book. Okay, to annotate it, to read it, to study it. And by Monday, April 27th, you are to hand in a one-page, single-spaced outline and summary of the book. And you're going to list at least 3 possible thesis statements for that paper. Okay? Once you've submitted that on that Monday, that week we will go over secondary source research. I'll show you how to search for secondary sources. I'll give you various websites. I'll suggest certain essays that you can read. And at the end of that week, on Friday, the 1st, you are then going to hand in a one-page outline summary for both of your articles that you will be included in your essay. Okay? On Monday, May the 4th, you guys are going to turn in a 2-page outline of your essay. Then May the 11th, you're going to turn in a complete rough draft. And then on May the 15th, the essay will be due. Okay? So gentlemen, if you have any questions, please email me. Your job right now then is to pick a book and to start reading. Okay? You've got about 2.5 weeks to do that. Okay? Don't leave it to the last minute, gentlemen, or it's going to be a poor paper. Okay? So please, please, please take this seriously and please read carefully, take notes, annotate, and study the book as best as you can. Okay? All right. Best of luck, gentlemen, and have a great spring break.